Well, good morning. It is Friday, April 4th, 2025, and I'm back here with my good friend, Dr. Eleanor.
Hello.
I won't keep asking you how you're doing because we've already done that. We've already checked in. So I realized that I kind of shift into that kind of like host mode, and I like just having a conversation. So um, before we got started here, you had mentioned that one of the things you wanted to address is the scientific. I think you used the phrase scientific spirituality. Uh,
Mhm.
that's kind of what I wrote down haphazard as you were saying it. So, do you want to speak to that?
I do. Um, and I want to address it from the standpoint of how misleading it's been for our culture to um, mentalize everything and to psychologize everything um, in a very superficial way. And the culture has emerged over time and gotten more and more away from the core spirit and the meaning of life for each individual. So that what I see in as a psychologist and as a professional who's been in the field for more than 50 years, uh, I've seen an erosion of happiness in people. And so many young people are so lost. And the, seeing how things are moving to AI um, carries a certain risk to it because tuning into the core of yourself to express yourself is now being you ask AI a question and it gives you the answer, and that's what people are using. So they're not even writing their own stuff anymore. And what sets my work apart from a lot of the other work in the field um, is that I was gifted by Ra the task of validating the human design system. And as a result, I expanded it to be scientific because the one 64 gate bodygraph is only 1/4 of the worlds we need to look at. And the calculation is not a complete calculation in itself. So if we look at astrology, they use a birth time and then do all kinds of machinations to get more data. In human design, there's the birth date and a period 3 months before birth that's supposed to be the whole picture of who the person is, and it's not. So when I was tasked with doing the science on human design, I not only did I code and look at every single possible variable I could within the body graph, but I realized because I also had been given by Ra what he thought was the dream design, and it is the dream design, because there is a sleep design and there's also an emotional matrix. So in a system that was a synthesis of the Tree of Life, astrology, the I Ching, I added a piece to it based on astrology. Um, and it produced for me 8 charts. And those 8 charts are valid scientifically because they hold up developmentally to critical periods in a baby's early life. Physiologically, because we are reading in pediatric literature now that the baby is not really a baby until 3 months after it's born. It's considered a neonate. And the first 3 months of a baby's life are considered now the missing fourth trimester.
Mhm.
So when you really think about that and you look at the 8 noble energy maps that delineate specific critical times in gestation and developmental markers for critical periods, you have a system that correlates almost exactly with the tree of life, and it holds up astrologically, it holds up scientifically to the developmental sequences and many components of psychological development. So, what does it tell us? It tells us that we live in 4 worlds, not one world. And it also demonstrates that if in development we as adults fail to acknowledge all 4 worlds within the child, that child cannot embrace their full self. I've also found that in the composite at 3 months of age, looking at that integrated chart that has the developmental components merged, that chart shows that 99% of the population are manifesting generators. So at 3 months of age, from a scientifically valid study, I can say without any hesitation, at 3 months of age, 100% of the population are here to manifest their actual potential. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. A baby at 3 months of age begins to make choices, has preferences for what they reach for, what they eat, if they're breastfed, how they nurse, whether they need additional food or not. Some babies do, some babies don't. But at 3 months of age, and you're a parent, you knew who your kids were by the time they were 3 months of age. You knew what they liked and what they didn't like, who they went to, who their favorite people were, and who they didn't really like being with. And those components of who we are our spirit guiding. And until we come back to living from spirit before we live from our mind, and we live in 4 worlds, the mental world, which is the waking world. Sitting here having a conversation, we're in the mental world.
Mhm.
Now, me wanting to talk about scientific spirituality comes out of my own life mission. That if I'm going to do podcasts, if I'm going to talk about things, I want it to be grounded. I want it to be scientifically verifiable because by training, I'm a social scientist and a psychologist. And as a psychologist, I certainly do not want to do anything that would disempower a person when my training has been to help them heal. And all of the healing comes spiritually.
Well,
All of the hurt comes spiritually.
right. Well, and I was kind of on my own values path before I met you, but you reinforced that for me too. And that the values really come from your spirit. You know, you might process them in the mental world or try to rationalize them, but
Well,
it's
we
like,
live in the mental world.
yeah.
So the as we come in to the existence, to this incarnation, we are a spiritual being manifesting in physical form. And that becomes the challenge. How do we live a life in the physical world that expresses congruently who we really are as a spiritual being?
Yeah, what comes to mind, and it popped in my head yesterday and it's popping in now, so I'll just share it. But like the idea that living with decisions probably need to come from spiritual values, right? You
Oh,
can,
always.
right, you can rationalize a decision mentally and or go with the flow because experience has taught you that it's going to be difficult. But like living with and sleeping with your decisions, it's clearly comes, it's beneficial to come from a spiritual place.
Well, it's not going to be successful
Hmm.
if it doesn't have that um, truth to it,
Hmm.
not long term. I mean, we can look at the history of psychology, for example, and I can look at theories that have come and gone because they are not based in true spirit.
No, for sure. Um,
I'd say Freud fits that category. I
sorry,
could get into
what's that
trouble for
category?
saying that. Um, well, when I was teaching college, um, and I taught a graduate level class on personality theory. And what I did in that class was I used Henry James' Portrait of a Lady as my teaching book because I found it so fascinating that you start out with a character who believes that because she's been given an inheritance that she has choice. And you see everything she sees and knows, but you don't put the pieces together until the end of the book when the truth really emerges. And, it's like, well, so much was wishing things or ignoring things or not recognizing things that were right there in front of even the reader's consciousness. So I've seen with Freud, for example, when I was teaching, that the personality theory books talked about Freud at great length and his theories, talked a little bit about NLP, and it talked a little bit about reality-based cognitive therapy and hypnosis. But in those days, Jung was not studied because he was too spiritual. He was too complex for the ordinary reader to grasp. And part of that was that he was talking about four types. He was talking about working with dreams in your own journaling process, going inward. And even now, I don't know how much Jung is studied or whether there's any movement in the field of psychology toward embracing spirituality. My guess is not. Judging from the funding being pulled from universities for its agenda, the spirituality is the furthest thing from the academic community at this time in our life. And without spirit, where's our humanity? So being one of the few people who can say that my esoteric system that talks about the four worlds is based in science and research, um, sets it apart from other things. And um, as I work with those documents, the charts, and talk to people, um, the importance of the four worlds in mental health is becoming increasingly apparent.
Yeah. Um, it could be just the circles that I keep. And so I'm hanging with more and more spiritually connected people. So maybe it's kind of like the same thing like owning a Tesla or a Volkswagen. Once you own one, you see them everywhere. So maybe that's what's going on for me. But it seems to me that there is more and more folks looking for something else, reaching for spirit.
Oh, there's no question.
Yeah. So that's the good news. um, when you initially started talking about scientific spirituality, the other thing that came to mind was just this idea of analysis paralysis. And because we were, at the time, if you were talking, it might have been prior to it might have been prior to when we started the stream, but just like the human design world and, a lot of folks that found design were seeking something, seeking answers. I know I've shared with you a few times. I used to look at, or I realized that when I found human design, I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me and everyone else, and that's not the way to do it. But at the time, that was my input device, right? It answered so many things that it became not a virus, but certainly it gave me some relief. It made me feel seen. Um, and curiously, like all of my own little discoveries led me to you because I was into hypnosis for some reason. Like, I don't even remember why. I was into all these things that it turns out just connected me with you. And then connecting with you connected me with spirit. I mean, plant medicine helped a bit too, but that was a brute force, knocked me between the eyes, showed me something else, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it for a while. Um, but and when I talk to other people about your work, particularly those that are in the human design world, where it's kind of got you at a cellular level, like it's hooked in you, right? This makes sense. I finally get it. Um,
Well, let's look at that for a second.
mhm,
Human design chart, as Ra disseminated it, as Jovian talks about it, the whole human design community is locked into the mental waking world.
yeah, for sure.
And it is only in the mental waking world and the physical biological world that we are emotionally reactive beings.
Mhm,
On a spiritual level, there is no solar plexus. So emotions on a spiritual level are compassion and love, not reactivity. And so when, Ross said the human design system is a synthesis of the tree of life, chakras, astrology, and the I Ching. But in fact, human design, the way it was taught and is being taught, is not a synthesis.
mhm,
It is only using the hexagrams of the I Ching and assigned meaning to them and to their lines, which are not being used accurately according to I Ching studies.
mhm,
So it's a faulty system
mhm.
that did not hold up scientifically, except from the standpoint of type across the matrices and centers. the center's held up by factor analysis.
Right. Yeah, the point I wanted to make, and I'm hoping others hear this because it's I've had this conversation with a few people. I think it was quite easy, and I mean, it wasn't. It's taken a long time. We've had a lot of conversations, so it wasn't necessarily easy. But I was already a manifesting generator, so
Mhm.
it wasn't like I was locked into I'm a projector and I was in that mental construct. For me, it was fairly simple. I was still a manifesting generator. I for me it was easy. It was like, oh, cool. I got even more channels. Let's explore those. Like it was playtime. It was new utilities from my Batman belt. Um, what I see is the struggle in others, particularly projectors, who have been locked into this story and really struggle with like imagining themselves as anything but. Part of it I've seen, like just even at conferences and stuff, where projectors they're having private meetings because they're here to save the world and they need to group to like just the amount of pressure that they seem to put on themselves as they're here to guide the rest of us. And so or
I don't even understand how they would get to that,
yeah,
that
and
they're here to save the world.
that's
I
the
mean, what is
impression.
that?
Yeah,
Projectors are told that their theme is bitterness and that they need to be recognized. So how
yeah.
do you come from being recognized to saving the world?
I mean, I could be totally wrong. It's my sense in how what I've been observing, what I've heard. I think it's something to do with the idea that they're here to help guide generator energy. So, like we got a bunch of these generators running around screwing things up for everybody because they're unaligned. So the projectors are going to hear and like, steer us into the right doorways, right? And I actually experienced that real time at the conference. I would have people saying, "Oh, you're a mani-gen, you're just going to screw things up," like, and actually, well, it wasn't so much me. It was a friend of mine that went to the conference 2 years ago. She was very new. We just traveled there on a road trip. Her introduction to human design was from me, and so not all that clear. And so she went around asking questions, and her experience was, she'd walk up to a bunch of manifestors and that were all in a group because they were being manifestors together, and it was some sort of little club, and she would ask questions, and the way she described it was she was kind of like told to go away, like you're not a manifestor, you're a manifesting generator, you're just gonna, she was basically felt unwelcome in these little cliques. And I felt really bad for her. I wasn't there during those interactions, and most people don't tend to do that to me. It could be my energy or confidence that I exude. They don't mess with me, maybe. um, but like her experience was quite different, and it was really eye-opening. I mean, all that to say, um,
It's disempowering to be thinking that you're limited to an assigned type you've been given based on two calculations that are probably not even completely accurate.
yeah, if we're
Uh,
gonna have strategy and authority, and you're already giving up your authority to a mental construct, I mean, it's just flawed right from the beginning. So, um, yeah. Hmm.
I would, a lot of the early language of design was extremely disempowering. Like the theme for a generator was frustration, a theme for a projector was bitterness. And in that one sheet, I changed all of the language early on. Uh, and what I think about those types is that a projector, for one thing, is here to recognize himself. That it's about a projector being able to know what is aligned and isn't aligned. So it's an energetic recognition of the inner self, the Holy Spirit, if you will, to is this aligned with me or is this something I need to realign? Uh, with a reflector, that's somebody who takes in energy and is extremely sensitive. But in any psychological system, number one, it's an artificial system. Number two, remember that you're alive. So if we're dealing with a matrix, whether it's a 64 gate matrix or a 15 gate matrix or a 20, whichever of the worlds we're talking about, as a human being, you are complete. You're not missing something. If you were missing something, you would be defective and you wouldn't function. But if you're walking and talking and thinking about a psychological instrument, then you have all 64 gates and they're all active. There's no energy missing inside of your autonomic and sympathetic nervous system. So, how can we take and make somebody deficient? It doesn't make sense. It's illogical.
Mhm.
And so to limit yourself to saying, I'm this or that. I mean, I kept saying to Ra, I'm not a manifester because I'm a lunar generator. So, and then I get other things. And a lot of the components to who I am and my design, um, I was saying way before I had my design. Like I remember saying to Marvin early on in our relationship that there's only one thing I would die for, and that was love. But I didn't mean personal love. I meant cosmic love and standing by the principles of being compassionate and loving.
Mhm.
And when I looked at my multidimensional design, there it was,
Mhm.
50th gate.
Okay. I want to ask you about, because we talked about crawling, I think it was last week, and you mentioned crawling a number of times. Um, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that this week. It keeps coming up, and I do think that I probably skipped crawling. I haven't had a chance to ask my parents, my mom yet, and I'm
Have
sure
you
she'll.
tried to crawl?
Uh, no, but I've no, no, not this week. But I probably should do that. I did actually, no, I did in a meditation. I actually was like visualizing it, and it was agonizing even there somehow. There was something like frustrating about
But you were in marching bands,
it. Hmm.
and that is akin to crawling
Hmm.
because you're doing opposite leg and arm.
Right. So I can march, um, but that would have been later in life, right? So kind of like a correction or an adjustment, I suppose. But I guess so. My curiosity is around possibly design type. Is it possibly something to do with the mechanics of my makeup that could have contributed to that, or it was just purely just natural?
Look, the design chart on a physical level did not show nuances of disease or characteristics like that. Um, I don't know a psychological instrument that I would put that kind of faith in. Clinical judgment, yes, but an instrument, no. And there's so much that's genetic, that's epigenetic, that's a mix between all of the worlds coming together as an integrated whole within you. And then you're interacting with your parents and possibly siblings. and possibly grandparents and relatives. And, now kids are being put into daycare when they're 3 months old. So there's so many factors that will determine how you manifest who you are in real life. And according to the tree of life, the task is to remember who we are and not get seduced into the mental waking world with emotional triggers, but instead stay tuned in to the higher octave of frequency that is who we really are, which is a divine emanation in manifesting form.
So in class, every other week, you address another, I want to say branch of the tree of life. What's the right word?
Another it's a channel or a path of intelligence.
Intelligence. Okay. Um, when I know you're not well versed with all the various human design apps and where people have taken this information, but I don't actually see anything where the tree of life is referenced much. I mean, I've always
No,
known
it's not.
that, right? I've always heard that human design is a synthesis of the Kabbalistic tree of life, but there's not a lot of evidence that that's there. In fact, the only place I've seen it was in Zeno's book from way back when, where there was a couple of pages for it. And that kind of surprised me because obviously that book's from a long time ago. And then even just like everything just kind of fell away. Was that partly because Ra dismissed it, didn't understand it, didn't
Ra not only didn't understand it, didn't know it, didn't study it, but he believed that all of astrology, all of the tree of life, all of chakras, all of everything should be thrown out, and the only thing we needed was the human design body graph and what he made up about it. Because at the time that Marvin and I sat with him, he dismissed colors, tones, and bases as unreliable, unverifiable, and not usable, and not given to him by the voice. And unless you could get to 10 seconds of birth time, he said it wouldn't be reliable. Now, when I tested it scientifically, there were no, I mean, from a statistical perspective, if you're going to have something that clusters together and has some meaning, you're going to see what we call factors. So, for example, if we look at an intelligence test, the two common ones are the Stanford Binet and the Whisker Wace. And if you look at those, the statistics have shown when they break down, this is about information, this is about picture completion, this is about vocabulary. When you break it down into its sub questions, those questions hang together by common factors. So, for example, if we're talking about a human being, we know that a human being is going to have 23 chromosomes. Now, if you're male, you're going to have Y chromosome, and if you're female, you're going to have X chromosomes. This is hard science. If you don't have the right number of chromosomes, you have deficits. That's what Down syndrome is. There's a chromosome that is faulty, and it changes how you manifest. So when we're testing intelligence, for example, those components that we're testing have common threads going through them that can actually be measured and correlated, so that we know it's reliable to say, this is about information, this is about vocabulary, this is about this skill or that skill or another skill. And then as a whole, we also know other things. If there's a variant that is too big between subtests, you can diagnose certain conditions. Remember, I taught testing. So I know the intricacies not only of what a test is, but how to design a test. And so when I tested the human design system with 30,000 cases and another 15,000 clinically, if not more, at some point I'll do a real count, but it's, way more than I care to count.
Mhm.
The things that held, in other words, when I looked at the centers, and I could see that a triangle center had 3 factors in common, and a square had 4 in common, that was very reassuring. It meant that this center and this center and this center could be differentiated one from another because of the commonality of factors within each center that made the gates in the center have some similarity that they wouldn't have if they were in a different center. You following me?
Mostly. I have a question churning in the back of my mind that I want to come to later. So I think I can hear my brain just sitting there. So, but I'm following. Keep going.
So, when I say that I'm a scientific spiritualist, I can say without any qualms from a scientific standpoint that what I'm using in the body graph, the noble energy maps, are the concepts and constructs that held up
Mhm.
and could be validated if somebody else read the same thing, that the same chart, they would come to the same conclusion. And they could validate it. I mean, human design people come to the same conclusion, but a lot of it is stories that they studied, not experiences they've had.
Yes. Mhm. Okay, my brain is splintering into 3 directions here. So let me see if I can
Okay,
formulate
so it's a triangle, huh?
it. Apparently, one of them is kind of unrelated, but I'm just curious about it. Um, One thing that Zeno said in one of her videos that I was watching recently, she was seemed to be alluding to the fact, and because you've said before, like there's no formula when you read a chart, right?
Right.
And it seems that a lot of folks in human design, I think myself as well, like we're looking for a formula. Like, how do I make sense?
Ra gave a formula,
Yeah,
and Zeno taught a formula.
right. What she seemed to be implying in one of these, it wasn't a rant, she was expressing herself, um, was that he had effectively made a system to make it so that he wasn't guilty of anything. Like effectively, the formula that he presented was to get him out of jail free kind of card, in Monopoly. Like he got to pass go, and that we've all kind of been learning this system based on his viewpoint only. And there's certain aspects of that that I would tend to agree with. When I look at his I Ching, pretty gnarly. It's a grumpy old lighthouse keeper, just angry and dismissive, and it never resonated for me. And funny enough, like
I've never even looked at it.
Yeah, well, there you go. Like that was my first introduction.
When I was interested in looking at the I Ching, I went back to the I Ching books,
Hmm.
not to Ra's I Ching, because he didn't know the I Ching.
Hmm. Well, and one thing I discovered, um, so there's an app that I've used for the traditional human design stuff, neutrino design. And I think I told you that like my massage therapist and occasional pickleball partner, like he worked on that. And the I Ching that's in that was his because you couldn't produce an app that used Ra's I Ching without permission and licensing and copyright. So he put his own in there. And and I think like that helped a lot at the time because it was at least an interpretation that wasn't as harsh, wasn't as angry. Um, and I had no idea that it was his. I just took it as this was Ra's at the time. So it was, and then as I've gotten to know the man, like it was just interesting. I'm glad that I at least had that lens for it because, and in nutrient design, you can actually flip between the two. And so I find myself contrasting. And I usually find I go to Nathan's. Like I'm like, if I'm gonna have something that's at least close at hand, it's softer language. It's I don't know, it just appeals to me more. Um, where was I going with that? um, I started with Zeno and oh yeah, and just this idea that like it was kind of it seemed to benefit Raw more than anybody. And
Ra believed very strongly that everything the voice told him was going to be true. And he believed that he was going to be shot on a specific day. He thought it was going to happen in Arizona. He thought he knew who was going to shoot him. Um, he also um, dismissed everything except the bodygraph that he was working with. And I was there when he made things up. I was there when the first time he taught circuits, and it was Ra was a very entertaining,
mhm,
very good storyteller. And um, he was always stoned. So if you're always stoned and always high, um, you have an open channel, so to speak, to the deep unconscious. And so he could formulate something that would resonate with what people needed.
mhm,
And so I was there when the first time he did circuits. I was there the first time he taught profile. Um, and he wasn't dishonest when he talked about it. I remember in the profile class, um, coming into the room, sitting down, and he said, "You're the first group I'm going to talk about profile to." And I was sitting and thinking about it, and I came up with the idea, he said, that it's like the floors of a house.
mhm,
And then he elaborated on each floor has a different meaning and a different view. And that's how he came up with profile. When I tested profile, it's a mathematical artifact, and you cannot assign meaning to it like that.
mhm,
In the traditional I Ching, you have lines that change, but Ra did not take into account that within a hexagram itself, somebody could shift their frequency. So people embraced, and Ra said, he told us with, you know, uh, he wasn't always dishonest. And he said he knew he was going to be shot and he needed to have enough money and enough legacy that his family would be supported. So it was all about making money for him to leave a legacy. And he did do that, but he was not shot.
Mhm.
So if everything the voice told him was true, and he didn't get shot on the day and time the voice told him he would, we have a system that was not, in fact, always true,
Mhm.
and where the voice was not right.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and we've talked about heart-centered work. Another thing that Zeno seemed to be postulating, asking the question. Like, I understand that Ra was very interested in this Bardo process, like how to die properly or how to die and return in the same family lineage. So if you're keeping, what she seemed to be implying was that part of this legacy and the wealth was that he wanted to re-enter later into that line of wealth. And that seemed to be the implication. And there's aspects of that doesn't seem very heart-centered, right? Like in this lifetime,
was not
like,
heart-centered at all.
yeah, so there's some truth that's.
Rob was if you look at his noble energy map, he was an emotional manifester and very egocentric.
Mhm.
And Rob was a narcissist,
Mhm.
plain and simple. A typical narcissistic personality
Mhm.
who, if you said something he didn't like, he would go into a rage. And I was there many times when he was angry at Zeno and Chaitanya and would badmouth them and send them a very nasty email and say, I'm never working with them again. And then 2 days later, he'd be back as though nothing happened.
Mhm.
Typical narcissistic personality.
Well, and I experienced that, as you know, firsthand with somebody, and that's what I could smell just from a distance. And my narcissist sociopath wanted to impress his father, and like it just there's so many parallels there that I can smell it. Um,
Yeah.
and it's bothersome. It's really bothersome. So, hmm. Okay, well,
Well, what's sad is how many people have been and continue to be misled by the human design system.
hmm. Yeah, and it's growing, and it grew at a time when people were behind their keyboards and not meeting in person because it really kind of exploded during the whole COVID thing, and more sharing, more like that's kind of where, in fact, almost most of the people I know, there's a certain time frame. It's like first quarter of January or of 2021 was just when it seems like, and maybe the people on we're just at a similar level of having learned about it, and so we're clicking in at that level. But there's something seems significant about that time frame that.
Well, it is a significant time frame on the cusp of the age of Aquarius
Mhm.
and Pluto moving into Aquarius and people wanting to live in denial and not wake up. And we're living at a time when if people don't wake up, they're going to have some very hard times.
Yeah, it's gonna be very messy. Hmm. Yeah, I think about that a lot. I'm watching it happen. Okay.
Well, you know, we can also look at the other side of it. There are many, many, many more people waking up,
Mhm.
and there are possibilities for a golden age and for spirituality and consciousness. It was recently discovered that underneath the pyramids in Egypt, there's a whole other world.
Yeah, they go down like 2 kilometers or something. So if we thought the pyramids were big, how did they, either who knows? I don't even know how to assess that. But yeah, I've been watching that situation very closely. And of course, someone sent me something and it was like it was AI generated, but it was so cleverly done that for a second I was like, holy cow. And it just turned out that it was someone's thoughts and renderings of what it might look like below. And we haven't got that far. They're just using radar and stuff to see these things. But this video was so compelling. I felt myself swept up with it for about 30 seconds, and I was like, wait a second. Like I had to really assess. And I'm feeling fairly switched on, intuitive lately. So like I got sucked into it really quickly. And it was interesting observing that. So okay, I've toured. Actually, I have to ask one more thing because you talk about the triangle thing, and then we can move on from the human design stuff because I know I drive you crazy with it. But the the color base and tone,
The what?
the color base and tone thing. All I want to ask is if you were to redo the statistics and you had birth times to within 10 seconds, do you think the results would be different? Because I'm
No.
no, so it would still be the same. Okay. And I have to ask why.
Um, because you're talking about such a minute component, and I don't know that it's real.
Mhm.
And I don't know that um, we'd have to measure it physiologically in addition to conceptually.
Mhm.
Because, where is that component in the body? What are we measuring? Where's the physiological component?
Okay.
So what are we really measuring? And it might be something very specific, but then we would need to know what it is we're measuring. What's it related to? What is the measurement? Otherwise, it's, you know, okay, let's say we're 10 seconds. So where is color, tone, and base in that 10 seconds? And what is it actually measuring?
Mhm. I mean, the reason why I'm having trouble letting it go a little bit is Jonah Dempsey did a color, base, and tone overview, and he used my bodygraph at the time. So he actually recorded it was a YouTube video. And so much of it resonated. And he had already gotten to know me a bit. We had spent some time together. And there was one part where he commented that he figured I was born 40 to 60 seconds earlier than the stated time based on his interactions with me. And the examples he used, I was it was kind of like hit me between the eyes. Like it was like that matched. Now, it could be a parlor trick. It could be I wanted to hear that. It could have been lots of things, but there was something about it that it just like I was just like this has it meant something to me. And I think that's happened to a lot of other folks that have spent time exploring that space. So that's a big hard. It's hard to let go of
Yeah,
when it.
but so what was it that I mean, it probably could be read from a different angle.
Yeah. Well, if you're interested, I could send it to you sometime and I could even just
Sure.
get you to the 3 minute point where he talks about it. At the time, he was commenting that he at the time he was actually saying Ra had some color and mine was the same, but what he knew of me that didn't line up. And so if he made that sort of mental adjustment of 40 seconds, he was like, that sounds more like the guy I met when we met in Seattle, right? And when he said it, I was like, yeah, that felt right to me. And
Yeah, but you see that nuance can come about through how things connect in the body graph
sure.
over time. Um, my guess is that you could come to it looking at a noble energy map because developmentally things are coming in and you're seeing what is impacting the person.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I just have to keep asking as we go here. It's helping me understand. I guess what I'm also curious about, like if Ra wasn't educated in these systems, how was he able to intuit what he did? Right? Was it quite literally that he was just writing up his own story once he got going and got caught up in his own hype and charisma? And or like how would he have intuited? Hmm.
Well, he told how he did it. He looked at a hexagram and he thought to himself, how can I explain the differences between the lines? And he thought about the stories of a house and he said, oh, that would make a good analogy.
Mhm.
So that's what he used.
Yeah,
And
well,
he amplified it. And when I tried listening to um, colors, tones, and bases for all of 364 gates lines, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. It was it didn't resonate, it didn't hold, it didn't scientifically hold. Um, it's a story. Ra was a great storyteller.
well, and you had the inside scoop on his behavior too and his motivations. So some of
I
it probably
spent a
just
lot of time with him.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So some of the
from
content would be
nothing.
like, oh, here he goes again. I can imagine.
At the time, um, really when we were interacting with Ra, we had fun. I mean, and there at one point he brought his wife and two kids with him, and they were in our home for a week. They had driven and stayed at our house and vacationed basically. Um, and I got to know him that way. Uh, but I also knew his limitations. And he was not, when he was, when he was working with Zeno and Chaitanya, he was a wimp,
He was a witch, a wimp.
a wimp.
Hmm.
He could not stand up to them about his business because they were the only game in town for him. And he didn't have enough of a following without them.
Mhm.
But at the point he tried to get a following with Rave Life Sciences and Marvin and me doing professional stuff. And professionals were not that interested. So and he told me, you're not good at this because you can't dumb it down to a fourth grade level. And we need to dumb it down to the fourth grade level because that's the population we're appealing to. That's their mentality. And whenever I attempted to do anything outside of that mentality, Rod did not want any part of it. Um, and he did acknowledge that in several places and in the triple design matrix book, he says you have to use the matrices to understand what's really going on. But he also, in the work that I was doing, He acknowledged that you could see things you couldn't see any other way, but he did not want to use it because it would undermine. And he said to me, "You found scientifically that there are 5 types. I'm going to keep teaching that there are 4 because my ego won't let me change." He wasn't dishonest about who he was. He was a scoundrel,
Mhm.
and he talked about it. His
Mhm.
profession before design, before he disappeared, was selling people things that didn't exist.
Yeah, not altogether heart-centered. So, no. Hmm.
Some of human design doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Or distorted or whatever way. Zeno and Chitan, yeah, at the end of the day, all this information, like there was a revelation, right? I guess is the term, the voice. There was making a business of it or trying to get the information to the masses. And then there were people involved that were the first people involved who ultimately their own way they understand things would have been how the information was created and shared, right? I mean, ultimately, so like there's really lots of hands and
Initially, Ra started in Europe. The Black Book was the revelation. And that book was going to be published in Europe, and Jürgen worked for the publisher. And the publisher at the last minute decided they weren't going to publish Ra's book. So Jürgen believed in the work, and he financed, using family money, the book and Ra. And they became partners and traveled around Europe teaching the Black Book. The Black Book is probably the most accurate transmission that Ra got of human design. And I don't know if you've seen the Black Book, have you?
no, and what's interesting is it's come up several times this week, and I think that's what I want to see or get my hands
Hold on
on.
a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you take the blood test? You have the blood tests.
Kate was sending.
Okay.
sent it.
Okay, have fun, drive safe.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I think that's probably what I need to do. Just to get back to basics and yeah, dial it back. What's been very interesting for me, I think, and it's possibly also again how we've connected, is I didn't follow what is the prescribed path for design, which was self-study. I instead paid for a dozen readings from different people and found myself pattern matching, like, oh, this person said that, this person said that. Okay. It's a bit of a consensus, and that's how I learned it. So my understanding of design is still like all over the place. Like I'm a hot mess with it. But I think that was really healthy for me in the end because I didn't get pulled all the way in and found myself always seeking other things, right? I mean, ultimately how I found you was about the court case in Italy, about the ownership of the bodygraph, right? And so I've had this conversation with someone this week. So and I was trying to make sense of it. My understanding was you can't copyright a revelation or because it's for consciousness, it's for greater humanity, no one owns it.
Right.
What you do own is the bodygraph because it was a rendering, a drawing. And at that point that exists, it can be printed and it's a piece of paper. That's why you own the bodygraph. And then my understanding is Jovian or whatever, because they didn't own it, made what some people refer to as the fat boy bodygraph, seems to be the description. And ultimately, it's a distortion from the sacred geometry, which I know is, it makes me giggle every time you refer to it as abomination. But like, I mean, it is. If it's not true or accurate, then it's an abomination. But it's just a funny choice of words.
I can't even read those other body graphs.
Well, and I
I
find that,
can't look at them.
yeah. Now, when you say that, because you've said that a few times, is it that like when you look at the true geometry, you actually see it different? Like you can see the energy move. It speaks
Now,
to you.
the geometry, as you know from being in my class, we've gone from the 32nd path of intelligence through the 19th path of intelligence. When we got to the three paths of return, uh, the correlation and the structure began to deviate. And if we look at the lower part of the body graph and you look at the tree of life, it's a beautiful model in terms of the issues that need to be completed psychologically and spiritually in all four worlds in order to reach the level where you're ready to ascend into higher consciousness. So when I've taught the four worlds, I'm teaching it using the tree of life because I wanted my students to understand how to read the body graph based on the tree of life. So from the sacral center, there are three channels in the tree of life. And in the body graph, there are three channels between the sacral and the root. And the tree of life says very specifically that in that 32nd path of intelligence, it is to come into incarnation and to understand that the physical body is not the essence of who you are, that we are spiritual beings living in a light body, and that the physical body is only of this world. And so when we start up the body graph, there are three channels. One for the emotional angelic world, one for the spiritual world, and one that's a bridge between the spiritual world and the emotional angelic world, which allows for the transformation in the splenic center, as in the tree of life, for transforming that information that has come through into creative intelligence and intuition. So when we begin to apply what the voice gave Ra to what the voice said is the synthesis, that's where you begin to get the true science. Because you begin to see that the ancient text is now giving us an instrument that we can read in a whole different way. Now, in the tree of life, we only have one channel between the root and the splenic center. But when we break it into the three in the body graph, we can see the nuance that a person brings to their intuition. So, for example, in my body graph, human design, I have the 5818. The 5818, interestingly enough, is called the channel of judgment. The channel between the root and the splenic center in the tree of life is related to judgment when you get through the 5027 and collective intelligence.
Mhm.
So you begin to see the integration and you begin to get the nuance of what that might mean in terms of somebody's consciousness. After all, the body graph is an instrument of consciousness. Why would anybody care about a reading? They want to learn something more about themselves. So if the tree of life is the ancient mystical representation of the journey towards self-actualization, then that's coded into the body graph. And indeed it is when you use all eight.
What I mean, the one thing I want to say is there's some really interesting work that people have done based on the human design body graph where it seems to correlate. And I
Mhm.
really would love for these people to reset back to the four worlds and apply that same process that they can't, because like some of the stuff is remarkable. And but I always think, well, yeah, but I know it's slightly off the mark. Like it could be better. So,
Mhm.
you know, I don't know how to make that happen. It's at this point, it's something that I would like to see happen. Um, yeah. Um, I've been having lots and lots and lots of faster and faster, we'll call them synchronicities. And I recall seeing, I think I went on a little YouTube binge about a year ago. And for some reason, I was finding myself drawn to Kabbalistic stuff. But there was a couple of fellas that were sharing their experiences and basically at the time they were warnings. Like, don't go into this unless you're prepared for what comes. And I didn't really make heads or tail of it at the time because I didn't have the experiences they were talking about. But, one fella talked about going for a walk in a forest and there was a waterfall and all of a sudden the water just stopped. It just stopped. It was frozen in time and space. And, he said he wasn't on any kind of medicines or anything. He just, he had been digging into this Kabbalistic principles and knowledge, and all of a sudden he was having these strange occurrences. So I wouldn't say I've seen a waterfall stop, but I've had enough things. I'm like, that's really neat. um, so it seems like I'm tapping into that, but coming at it from, the angle of your work. Because honestly, half the time it's still Charlie Brown teacher for me when you talk about the tree of life. Like I hear it, I know I'm taking it in, and it's processing in the background, but I quite literally I had if I interrupted you every time I didn't understand something, you wouldn't get very far. so so I'm doing my best to be respectful of your time in the class and stuff.
I am not good at dumbing things down.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I don't think you should. Um,
I'm not capable of it.
yeah, I seem to be good at it. This seems to be it takes me a little time, but I'm pretty good at that. So, um, the other thing that you said, and was early on, and you were talking about Down syndrome, and I forget the words you used, but it was like they're missing a chromosome if with Down syndrome. And the way you phrased it, and I don't think you meant it that way, but it kind of was like there was something wrong with them. And the first thing that came to mind is I don't think I've ever actually met anyone with Down syndrome that wasn't the most lovely soul, like
Hmm.
just happy, childlike. Um, but that's been my experience and I
Mhm.
wouldn't just been exposed to people at a grocery store. I imagine in your work you've been exposed to more folks with Down syndrome or
No,
families that no.
probably not.
But like there's something very childlike and innocent about.
Yes, but the fact of the matter is they have difficulty functioning
Mhm.
in the mental waking world the way it exists.
Right. So,
So whatever their karmic incarnation is about, um, they're not regular.
mhm,
We have the norm, and usually in physical as well as psychological, things come in a normal curve.
mhm.
So most of the population will fit into 68% of commonality. And then you have the extremes. So it's like you know, a normal curve. And um, you know, autism spectrum. Um, when I was in graduate school, Bruno Bettelheim was the person who was dealing with autism. And he would lock people into the orthogenic school. And he believed that it was a parenting issue, not a genetic issue, and that it was the mother's fault. And the women who worked at the orthogenic center couldn't go home. They had to dedicate their life to these autistic kids. And it was, you know, looking back on it, Bruno Bettelheim was not a great guy. And he did a lot of harm to autistic um, people and to even the concept of autism. But, you know, it's a very tiny group, and you know, it's more autism now than there was in the 60s. Um, but it's still in the minority in terms of, and it's a genetic, probably a genetic shift of some kind or some kind of biochemical thing.
Mhm.
It's certainly on a physiologic level because somebody who has autism doesn't end up without autism. You know, and so do we see it as a problem or do we see it as a gift? It could be either one. We now know that a lot of autistic people are telepathic
Right.
and communicate telepathically. So, you know, who knows? But we certainly, when we're dealing with the psyche, usually talk about the more common 68% and not the outliers.
Yeah, so many things on that. Where my brain plane landed on, like Ra would talk about rave children in 2027 and stuff. It seems to me that it, in a way, it's the recognition of these people that have been here this whole time, you know, autistic kids, whatever, neurodivergent, that are being recognized for their talents. It's not that they're just going to
There
start
didn't used to be
performing.
so many.
Yeah, but
It's 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 definitely a shift in um, sociological, biological studies. Even in the 60s, we were tracing shifts in when women were getting their period, when puberty was starting, and it was shifting downward.
Mhm.
And it's probably, we know that vaccines have increased autism. And we also know that birth control pills put estrogen into the water table. So things are shifting, and that's evolution. Do I believe what Ross said about 2027? No, I don't.
No, no, but there are patterns, themes of that seem to be playing out. So there was something maybe in the astrology that, you know, suggested that. Like I heard someone the other day refer to herself as neurotypical. I was like, we got yet another label, right? So isn't neurotypical just the opposite of neurodivergent? And neurodivergent was a label applied to people that were, you know, difficult to manage or you know, find place in the system, right? So it's a crazy mess. Um, the other thing I learned this week, so Asperger's, which I don't know a ton about it, uh, like it's named after a Nazi scientist, like Dr. Asperger, who used to torture these children that were that had these, they were different.
Ticks,
Yeah.
ticks.
Yeah. So, I mean, even that, like just that label of labeling someone with this fella's name that tortured and killed children that didn't fit in, like it's just awful, right? So I think people are moving away from that phrase now, anyways. But I still hear it all the time. So there's not. I mean, I had no idea it was tied to this Nazi scientist. So, um, yeah, very, very interesting. Elon Musk, when he was on Saturday Night Live 4 years ago, he was the host one night, and he opened with, like that he has Asperger's, and I mean, just it's a state of the world right now where our people are infuriated by his involvement in politics and stuff, and calling him a Nazi because he raised his arm up and all this stuff, right? And it bothers me so much that there's a large collective group of people bullying this very powerful man who's also going to be very sensitive and have traumas. And it's like if you want to make someone evil, bully them to the point where, because I've seen interviews with him over the years, and I can see the kindness in him, and I can see that the desire to do something important.
Well, he is doing something extremely important,
Yeah.
and he is a genius. I mean, he is clearly different and very brilliant, beyond comprehension brilliant, uh, and doing things that nobody else can do.
Yeah, I mean, his vision, it goes so far beyond where people are thinking right now. And also I mean, he's his own worst enemy at times, because his sense of humor, I can tell that he can game people. Like he can he's just so far ahead of them that it's comical, but then it doesn't land well. And so then there's, backlash. So, but yeah, just a fascinating person. I found myself really investigating him early on. This is 5, 6 years ago. There was so much I was drawn to about what he was doing. I think part of it was I was just jealous. He's basically 8 months older than me. And, when I look at what he's accomplished, and then I think about what I've done, it's can really level set you. So yeah. Yeah. Um, Yeah, I just needed to say that. So I'm frustrated. I'm someone that has owned a Tesla and bought it because it's the safest car in the world, and because it's going towards a future where people don't need to drive cars because they're driving angry and they're driving distracted, and it's there's a mission there that I believed in.
I was interested in leasing one,
Mhm.
and that you cannot lease them in South Carolina.
You can't even buy them in Texas where they have a factory, because they don't subscribe to the dealership model. Actually, I don't know if that's entirely true anymore, but it used to be that you couldn't buy Teslas in certain states because the government mandates in certain states that you have to have a dealership. And
Hmm.
Tesla eliminated that, which is the whole pressure sales. Like, you need to get these mud flaps and do this and do that. They're just like, here's your car, drive it away, you'll love it, right? Like, how beautiful is that? So, like, the fact that government even steps in with that horseshit just makes me crazy. But you know what I love about my Tesla, and it might I do Reiki in my Tesla, um, because I just put it in full self-driving, and my hands are available if I need to grab the steering wheel. But I can just sit there and I just do my Reiki positions while my car takes me where I need to go.
Mhm.
So, like, there's all sorts of advantages to it. So, also, just being completely broke, I'm really glad I bought that car 4 years ago, because I'm not paying for gas. And every day I leave my driveway and my car's full because it's been plugged in at the house. So eventually people get it and they'll recognize the true benefits of this. But um, well, we've clocked in at our near hour and a half. So are you complete? Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, we could stop.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
have
it's
a
kind
lot to
of noisy
do.
here. We have this moms and babies thing. So the energy on the other side of this wall is like, it's beautiful, but it's also distracting. I'm having
Okay,
trouble hearing. So
sure, we can stop. Are there
okay.
any questions in the live feed before we stop.
No questions, but a new name popped on here, Julie McDonald, and this is about half an hour ago, but she said, I think I'm beginning to understand why I never really got into HD. I had interest, but I never pursued it. And then she followed up with, I still have the interest, though. The system definitely has something to offer, but I resonate more with Eleanor's teachings from the webinars. So,
How nice.
yeah.
Thank you, Julie.
Um, yeah. Well, I resonate with it.
Let me just reiterate what I said in my webinar yesterday, that my real work is the four worlds. And the real work in the field of psychology is for people to embrace who they are and to embrace their inner alignment and to recognize that there is so much in the mental, waking, emotional world that is not core to who they are. And that as adults taking care of children, our job is to empower them on the inner plane. And for those listeners who've been labeled, um, stubborn, selfish, um, domineering, angry, lazy, inefficient, think about any name calling names that have been used by peers when you were a kid, or teachers, or parents. And that's not who you are. And there is no label for who you are. So my job is to open the door to the in the field of psychology, to the fact that we do live in four worlds, and that most relationships are successful if the values are aligned, and are not successful when they're at odds with each other. And communication is state specific. So you cannot communicate in the mental waking world using spiritual language. You cannot get to the spiritual core using mental world language. And teaching people the differences is very empowering. So for any of the listeners, this is not about a body graph. It's not about labeling yourself or defining yourself. It's about embracing the truth that you're a spiritual being and that you know a hell of a lot more than you think you know. And you're designed, regardless of what system you use, to be successful in the world, or you would not be in a body. So embracing that within yourself is really key. And any system that takes you there is going to work for you. There's not one size fits all. And we wouldn't want there to be.
No. Cool. All right. Well, let's tap it off there. I'll hit that little button. Look all